I am Dr. Mark James, and you are watching The Third Rail. Our mission here at The Third Rail is to spark fearless conversations about taboo topics in politics, culture, and society, creating a brave space for transformative dialogue that is inspired by our inextricable ties and our history in this country. Our quote of the night is from our very own poet laureate, Toni Morrison. The function of freedom is to free someone else. Let's elaborate on Sister Morrison's quote. Freedom has never been free in this country. For any of us that call the Stars and Stripes home, freedom has never been free. Freedom has been paid for with the sweat, blood, and tears of many people of this country. Many people that after paying with blood, sweat, and tears has been ostracized from what life calls the stratification of promise. In order to truly be free, those who are bound, those who are enslaved, when they reach the point of freedom, it is their duty, the duty of the ancestors' love, the duty of our story, the duty of what we know when blood meets our soil, the duty of walking on the bones of our ancestors without the knowledge of the history. Our job is to pull each other. In pulling each other, we're not divided by what separates us. In this country, we are bound by our history that we're ashamed of. And it's only in the circle of life, when we join the circle together, is when we understand true freedom. Here's our story of the day. There's a story about a sister named Ona Judge. She was born into slavery at Mount Vernon around 1773. She served as Martha Washington's maid and escaped in 1796 from Washington's Philadelphia household after learning that she was gifted to another enslaver, defying the hypocrisy of a free nation led by a president who hunted her relentlessly as a fugitive. With the aid from Philadelphia's free Black community, she fled to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where she married, built a life, and lived under the constant fear of being recaptured. Again, freedom can never be free. Freedom to be able to speak can never be free. There's always consequences and division with the truth. But it's better for a man to live in truth than die with no voice. This is The Third Rail, and I am Dr. Mark James. Listen, we are going to be off the chain in Jesus' name. There are no boundaries, but our job here today is to bring you something that you don't get every day, is the inextricable truth, the ability to speak without fear, have a good time, enjoy the conversation, and build and build and build. I want to be able to introduce somebody, but this guy right here, good looking guy, right? Big, burly looking guy. I want him to introduce himself.
All right. My name is Geoffroy de la Forcade.
All right, now.
People around here, they call me Dr. D. Obviously, that's French. I was raised by a French family, emigrated to the United States, learned English as a boy, which is where the accent went, and then returned to France. Grew up and have been going back and forth since and traveling the world. So I'm a cosmopolitan person with no home who just landed in Petersburg and the Griffin Lounge. And Brother Mark feels at home for the first time in a long time.
That's awesome. I'm real simple. I was born in a place called London, England. A lot of people don't know that about me, but I'm exposing it, right? This is about vulnerability, so it's important that we be totally open and honest. So I was born in London, England. My mom was a revolutionary from the very beginning. I learned about things like the Brixton riots, which she played a role in planning. And then all of a sudden we moved. And I need to say that my parents are of Jamaican descent, so my lens gets more diverse as we keep going. We moved to a place called Englewood, New Jersey, where when I came to Englewood, New Jersey, I learned one thing. Number one, get rid of that English accent. Number two, everybody that looks like you might not be friendly with you. And number three, it's a whole new ball game in upstate New Jersey, the Northeast. Then, after being there a couple years, 5 to be precise, I moved to a place called Fort Lauderdale, Florida, better known as Fort Lickerdale. And I was raised in Fort Lauderdale, and then I started to understand what different things in society were. Like, I started to understand what a redneck was. Right? I started to understand what sundown towns like Davie, Florida, places where I learned that you needed to be out of by a certain time. Then I went to college at University of Louisville and had another deep experience in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, going to school and getting chased after getting gas at a place that we were denied. And by the time I was fully educated with that and moved back home, it made me a person of revolutionary thought because I always asked the question, why? So in the third rail, this is why we're here. We're here for unfiltered view of conversation. The ability for two people from different polarizations to be able to come together with common thought, common conversation. And guess what? You won't believe it. Love. That is what we do. And that is the third rail.
You know, I just want to say something. The few years I spent as a kid in the United States were in a cozy little town on the North Shore of Massachusetts, where I had all the comforts in the world, a good school, a good upbringing. And I got to tell you, during those years, that wonderful childhood that I had in the United States before returning to my native France, I didn't know I was white because no one ever told me.
Well, I tell you what, growing up as a black young man in America, I knew the hell I was black.
Yeah.
That is a definite.
That's the definition. Whiteness is believing that you don't have that stigma, that you don't have a color, that you don't have privilege. It's not knowing what you represent in the biggest scheme of things. It's an incredible freedom.
It also talks to a book that I wrote, The Weight of My Black Skin, that speaks about the difference between those weights, right? Mm-hmm. The not knowing that exists is powerful in someone's life versus someone that knows it exists. Right. For example, Doc, here's my son, my middle son. He's getting ready to go to school at West Point. And you know what I'm doing on the day that he's leaving? I'm teaching him how to handle being stopped by a police officer. I'm teaching him how to interact with a police officer as a West Point cadet. Less than 0.01% that apply in the country get in. And I have to teach him on the day that he leaves how to interact and survive. And that might be the difference. When you say not knowing versus survival, the in-between is the living life of what we call the American dream.
But when you start asking why, which is a defect I was born with.
Yes.
And when you start feeling love for people very different from you,
Yes.
and when you start listening to the stories and the teaching of people who've lived different lives, who've been around for a long time, who've been through, the struggles of existence, it is a major, major shock to realize that you live in a society where you're not entirely free to determine not only your role in it, but how everybody, gels together, how everybody interacts, right? It was a long apprenticeship before I started teaching in an HBCU, Norfolk State University, to understand that it wasn't good enough to have all the right ideas about equality and respect, but it was a hard learning experience to be able to empathize and be able to share and to be able to love with people who had an entirely different experience of the same reality as me.
You know something in my book, The Weight of My Black Skin, I actually speak about that there is a created weight, a white burden that brothers and sisters that don't embrace that given narrative, like yourself, right? That have dedicated your life. When he says HBCUs, we're talking about our historical Black colleges and universities. Shout out Virginia Union, Delaware State, got to give you some love. Norfolk State, work there too, got to give you some love. But, that's what drew me to this gentleman, because here he is, and I'm going to go ahead and put him on blast. Here he is with an Ivy League degree where he had options to go and teach anywhere. Yeah. And he found roots, comfortable roots, in one of the greatest treasures in American history, historical Black colleges and universities. And in the book, I speak about that white burden also, because one of the things that we do here, we're not one-sided. We speak about it all with fear. And, that white burden for those that are conscious, those that are understanding, and those that embrace that through conversation, we make change.
Right.
Through development and relationship, there can be change. So I met this gentleman, and he was sitting at a corner from me, and there was silence. And he heard the owner of the facility come in and talk to me. And then I felt like a kindred spirit. And then he moved from where he was. And then he started a conversation, and that was it. And it was amazing to me how people from different places in the world, different experiences, different layers of skin, but yet we share the ability to laugh and love, the ability to share as common men.
We shared a community of soul.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And it was spiritual. And one of the things I left after that conversation was, I said, wow. I said, how much ignorance blocks this? How much ignorance, traditional ignorance, blocks the opening of knowledge and love?
But to think about it, ignorance is the safe option. If you repeat what you were taught, and if you keep your eye on the ball that you were thrown and don't look anywhere else, some people may define that as ignorance. Other people may define that as self-preservation. And I think the problem we have is that people don't want to get involved in dialogues out of the box. It's risky. You know what I'm saying? You might make a mistake. You might reveal something about yourself.
You might show a weakness.
You might show a weakness.
So one of the things that I like to teach, Doc, is about the swimming pool. Because the swimming pool has a lot of lessons in it, especially if you can't swim, right? But the swimming pool is really us in life. In the shallow side of the swimming pool, you feel comfortable. You're able to walk. You're able, even if you're not a swimmer, you feel comfortable because your full body's not immersed. You are able to say and do as you like. Mm-hmm. But when you get into the deep side of the pool, the layers of vulnerability that create true change is what scares people. And that's why we find out that ignorance is shallow. Ignorance remains in the 4-foot area. Because if you go to the deep side, you'll be able to realize that in the level of ignorance, there's shared governance in stupidity.
Right, but it's not an easy switch. I mean, if you don't know the right moves, you drown, right? Learning how to swim is a long, drawn-out process, and none of us really do it well yet.
Death is inevitable.
Yeah.
And like Tony said, if you're not willing to live free, how do you die?
That's right.
Every time that you look at a tombstone, you see the beginning date and the ending date. The commonality for us all is the dash that lays in between us. And that is where we have to find our common ground. That is where we have to find a way to live. What I found out about ignorance is that you just keep loving and living through it. I've had conversations in my life where I've had debates with racists. And one of the things that I notice is that if you keep speaking, if you keep educating, eventually somebody will get to a question that they'll have no answer.
That's right.
And that's what I mean about the deep side of the pool. The deep side of the pool answers those questions, asks those questions that are uncomfortable.
But once you learn to ask the question, you realize you were the ignorant one. I think it's important not to stigmatize ignorance. Ignorance is something that you can change.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
a lot of people have it. They weaponize it. They protect themselves by hiding behind it. But how do you get out of it?
So is that like relationships in America?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I could go around telling everybody that I have a better education than them and that I have a knowledge of history and that all they have to do is listen to me.
Right.
That's not what it's about.
Okay.
Really what it is listening to each other and trying to figure out what we're hiding behind and trying to get past that mask. You know, historically, when people didn't understand something, the safe thing they did was they ritualized their ignorance. They invented mythologies and stories that they could identify with. They invented heroes. And then when something was wrong, they referred back to the mythology to understand it, right? Well, we live in a society where a lot of the mythologies are dead, where people live very isolated, very alone. And in order to join a community, especially in the world of the internet, sometimes you just have to mimic ignorance, you know? I mean, you have to take whatever information you get and fight with those weapons. So when I came to the South, everybody from the North, including my professors, educated people, they told me that I was crazy because, well, those people, they're all evangelical Christians. They're uneducated. They're poor. It's dirty. There's crime. Why are you going there? Think about the layers of ignorance in those comments, right? They were basically prejudices, right? And to tell you the truth, it took me a long time to learn to live in the South. I had to be able to talk to people who I might have been another. Yeah, and as somebody who, you know, came from the middle class and who didn't have some of the struggles. And, you know, I had to understand the complexities of race. To do that, I had to listen to people of different races, right? I found myself in discourse communities that didn't hear each other. I found myself in a reality where if I didn't get involved in the conversation with humility and acceptance, I was never going to be able to push the conversation past ignorance. So it's not about bringing enlightenment. It's about generating trust.
That is a dangerous word. You know, I'm going to let you know.
You've already told me that.
Yeah, the story about my football coaches. And I won't tell the full story here, but one of the things I used to tell, there was a coach that told me, he said in the middle of a game, he said, "Coach, you got to trust me." And I said, "Trust is for you get the rest." And I said to him, let's not go by trust, let's go by work. So a lot of times people go by the evidence. And you know what? I think what breaks the ability to build to the cycle of trust is that things don't stay consistent. There's always something different that comes into play.
Always. And
I think that interferes with generational thinking, right? It interferes with the way that we see each other, live with each other, and be able to grow with each other.
Okay, forget trust.
Okay.
But I think it's important to find common ground. Even if that common ground is very small.
Gotcha. That dash is small on every tombstone.
That's right.
Right? It's about 3 inches long, right? About 1/4 of an inch wide.
Yeah.
But guess what? On there, we stand together. And we've got to figure it out. Because at the end of the day, uncomfortable conversation leads to the truth. It is when we try to find the easier ground. Some people say take the higher ground. Well, that's because the subway is gone. You know what I mean? A lot of times we say take the higher ground and then we move away from reality. We're in the clouds. But there's a reality that we have to face every day.
Well, that's because when you're facing a chasm of understanding, when you're facing a complete lack of commonality, you want to win. You want your version of the truth to prevail. And I think
somebody has to win.
I think that's a little bit toxic. You have to step back and say, let's stop fighting and hold on and see, what is it exactly that separates us? You got to be clear about that. Because if you go around with this happy-go-lucky idea that nothing divides us and it's all a lie, then you don't see the social realities in which we live.
So I do want to tell you, you better stick around for episode 2 because we will be talking about this and how religion and the church actually affected the relationships, the way relationships are
That's
built,
right, yeah.
and how they're sustained and how the vision is sustained by policies and the way that we live. So make sure you check out episode 2 because that's where we're going. So, Doc, all right, you said all that, right? You said we agreed, let's eliminate the word trust, right? Let's eliminate the word trust.
Because trust can be blind, right? So,
correct.
Okay.
Let's stand on that dash.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's the important part to me. Let's not be afraid to embrace the history.
That's right. Well, I became a historian for a reason, right? I mean, I was really so devastated with the present that I had to work out his genealogy. And that opened up my ears and my mind to the stories that people tell.
You know what was interesting? And when we speak, you'll tell, there's things that mean a lot to us. Your history is important. If I ask you your history, he could probably go for about 10 minutes talking about the south of France. And then his voice starts to change. He starts to do all that. No offense.
Yeah, we all have.
Give us a little French. Give us a little French.
Nous avons tous une identité. Il n'y a pas de raison d'avoir honte de son identité. There's no reason to be ashamed of your identity, who you are and where you come from. And for me, that's tough because I come from privilege. I want to be ashamed of it.
Interesting.
But I'm not, because I also got to be whole. I got to say, you know what? My family, historically on my father's side, they're military, right? So knowing the history, these people served their country. They weren't rich, but they played a role in the history of France. But that history was colonial. My grandfather was an officer in Morocco in the cavalry. My father, the first son, was destined to become an Air Force officer, but he had polio as a child. So that made it impossible, and he decided to pursue the American dream. He came over here. But when I look at my ancestry, I'm thinking all the things that I object to in the history of France, the imperial history, right? The colonial history. Am I going to carry a burden all my life and say, oh my God, I was part of that in my blood? No. I'm going to say, listen, we all grew up somewhere. We all have a history. We all carry a burden. And what you do with that knowledge so that it doesn't become ignorance is what's important.
It's interesting that you call that a burden. Let me tell you about an experience that I had at a university in Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to connect it with a university right here in Richmond, Virginia. So I was in Uganda. I gave a speech for graduation at a university. And I got the young people, the graduates, these are the top graduates together, about 25 students. And I was talking to them on a round table. And I asked them, I said, one question. I said, I want you to tell me who you are. Each person elaborated for at least 5 to 10 minutes, going back generation after generation of who they are, where their family was from. It was important. The land, what their family did, even the animal representation that represented who their family name was, their bloodline. I came to America to one of our HBCUs and ran a program. And I said to everybody at the end of the program, I said, all right, guys, I'm running an experiment. I'm going to compare and contrast my experience in Uganda. I want you to stand up and tell me Go back as far as you can, your ancestry. A white kid got up. He went back 4 or 5 generations. I had to stop him. A black lady got up from the Caribbean. She went back 3 generations. I shared that the James family is from the Grange Hill Sugar Plantation in Jamaica that was bought and owned by the James Plantation. But we were proud forced immigrants of the Ashanti tribe.
Mm.
Henceforth, the nice little gap in my teeth. And I was able to go and speak deeply about that because I've been there. I've been to Westmoreland and I've been to the parts in Jamaica and I studied the history. Then I asked 2 African-American young men and 1 African-American young lady. The African-American young lady could only name her grandmother. Both of the African-American young men could not even name a grandparent on their father's side.
Mm.
What we're dealing with in the course of what you said, in history, we have to stand now. Hold my hand. Because we're standing on that dash.
Right.
But when we stand on that dash, we have to accept the history between us.
Exactly.
And my friend, that's what happens in America, is that we want to have amnesia for those things that hold itself true to why America is the way it is. We understand that racism is a self-contained construct that was developed here to be able to help operate the system of capitalism. We understand that. We understand that the manufactured hate original roots were economic. We understand that. We understand those things. And we have to understand the plight of the African American. Now, I say all that to say this. In Uganda, I asked the second question. Who are the great blacks from America? I'm almost afraid to say it, but I'm going to say it because we're all thinking. Michael Jordan.
That's right.
LeBron James.
The consumer culture.
Bill Cosby.
Mm-hmm. That's what connects us today. That's the superficiality of the community we're trying to build out there, a virtual community of shared consumer culture that tells us nothing about who we are.
Absolutely. But you know what the trick to it is? Everywhere I've gone around the world, and I'm sure you can echo this, that unique urban Black American culture is desired by everybody in the world.
That's right, including by me. So I got to tell you, let me just tell you quickly, all right? So I told you my grandfather was in the cavalry, and he was an officer in Morocco. My father was born in Casablanca. The big amnesia in France is the colonial past. It's embarrassing. Most people don't want to talk about it, on the left or on the right. It's an unspoken truth. I didn't learn about it growing up. And frankly, I have no evidence that my grandfather was one of the quote-unquote bad guys individually. He was a sensitive man. He had a heart. He was an artist, and he demonstrated through his art a great appreciation for the beauty of Arab and Berber culture. So whatever that meant back then, he lived in his time, and he was where he was. Who am I? Well, my parents, because my father had this disability that prevented him from being military, and my mother had been an exchange student in California, was a bilingual clerical worker, they decided to come to the United States. Why? Because they had a vivid memory of being liberated by the Marines, especially my mother, who was from Normandy, right?
Wow.
So I've never been a big fan of flag-waving patriotism, wherever it is. I think it leads to dark places. On the other hand, I have to appreciate that part of me and part of my life and part of their experience is that they had a great temptation to come here for freedom from their perspective, right? And the third thing is, I was baffled when I became a historian and started learning about the dark side of all this history. But how did I get out of that? Well, I realized that, you know what? If you start unraveling the story that we tell ourselves as patriotic Americans, as patriotic Frenchmen, and looking underneath the carpet a little bit, there are some things to be ashamed of, but most important, there are things to be proud of. For example, the main, I think, source of freedom and of our understanding of freedom in America is not European philosophers or founding fathers. It's Native and African American resistance to the powers that be. And in the case of Europe, I discovered, and this was a long apprenticeship, it requires some reading, some talking, and some hard truths,
Speak the truth.
that there has always been an African presence in Europe as well. And that African presence was not only denied, so that's the question of power, right? But is feared today. It's not understood, you know? It's something that's seen as abhorrence. It doesn't correspond to the mythology that I'm comfortable living in ignorantly, you know? Not me, but the average French person, you know? So how do you break out of that? Well, you know, you have to get beyond the whole the Judeo-Christian obsession with guilt.
Episode 2.
You got to get beyond that. You got to live with who you are, and you got to get to a different place where you want to go, and that place is freedom. And it's a hard place to go, even with privilege.
It's a hard place to go, even with privilege. So let me tag on to this, what I was saying. I have been to every continent except Australia. Just about. And the Aboriginals in Australia are calling my name to go and sit with them. So that will happen in the next year.
Everybody knows who they are, right?
Absolutely.
They're the original Africans.
Absolutely.
They weren't even seen by Europeans until the 19th century.
Absolutely. But you know what's amazing? And I'm going to bring that into current context with what you just said. I'm going to say it again because I don't think you heard it. The African American culture. This is going to be too powerful. Let me take a puff.
Yeah, mine went out, man. I can't light up on the air.
Yes, we can.
All right, this is the third rail.
Yeah, this is the third rail, baby. Listen, African American culture is the most sought after culture in the world. But here's the unique part of it. They were taught it meant nothing.
That's right.
There's an African philosopher that goes on TikTok and speaks about how there's no such thing as African American culture. He's full of it. It is the most resilient culture that has ever been created. Forced illiteracy turned leadership. Give me the scraps of a pig and make delicacies. The culture is the most resilient, but the part of ignorance that has dominated even in the Black community is to make sure we don't know it.
It's the pursuit of freedom, not the pursuit of hoops. But you know what? Don't belittle the popular culture, because a lot of people, my students, are always fascinated. I teach a lot of world history through music, and it boggles their mind how deep the African contribution to world music is. How the language of freedom, that is improvisation, you know, that is playing jazz, for example, singing the blues, praise songs, and things like that. It's not an isolated African American cultural trait. It is a consequence of a long history that unraveled of resilience and of protest. And it's something that was like a contagion, like the Haitian Revolution. It spread all over the world. Once you know that, you have a different version of what it means to be a citizen of this world, beyond race, but with an appreciation that, you know, the people who to this day continue to be commodified, continue to be killed under the boot of, you know, a policeman like George Floyd. These people who have been through everything over the last 200 or 300 or 400 years have shown the world that oppression is not a necessity, that it's not an obvious outcome, that it's not a natural part of the evolution of human societies, and that they're going to break out of it no matter what. And I want to make a last point. I always thought that pursuing freedom is putting yourself out there in a protest, putting yourself in danger, getting involved in political activism. Well, that's one part of it. But you know what I've learned from African American history? The biggest contribution of the enslaved men and women that came to the Americas is that they almost immediately, in their vast majority, became fugitives. And many people are still fugitives in society today.
Well, if you're disentangled or unattached from your history, you are a fugitive.
That's right. So we have to talk about fugitivity, what it means, because you feel disentangled, disconnected. But that fugitivity created a new sense of community, created a new sense of autonomy, and gave a whole new meaning to the term freedom. And it also taught them to interact with the structures of the oppressive society around them, because you have to eat, you have to live, you have to hide in plain sight. So there's a lot that African American culture has taught me, going all the way to the story of Brer Rabbit, who outsmarts everybody, right? There is a lot of unspoken forms of resistance and forms of freedom in the everyday existence of African American men and women that has been going on for a long time, that is a skill, and that is something that's hard to break. It's something that's hard to see from the outside.
It's a mentality.
It's a mentality.
You know, like as a proud descendant of a Jamaican family, you know, I could say there's been no greater contribution to African American resistance than that small island of Jamaica. You know, if you think about the Garveys, you think about everybody that has been touched by the language, by the culture, by the music, right? And to me, Jamaica's this small island. But when I think about the African American culture and the resilience of it, wherever I go, man, I was in China, Shenzhen, China, and I saw our culture.
You forgot to mention when you talked about your revolutionary mother,
yes,
that she was a Garveyite.
That's right.
The United Negro Improvement Association, founded by the Jamaican Marcus Garvey, had chapters all over the world.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people don't know this, but the second largest chapter in the world was in Cuba, a place where to this day, historians are, hesitant to admit that they were part of that web of discussion and of, liberation. Because Cubans like to think that they have their own specific brand of rebellion. And a lot of times they'll say, well, all those people who belong to the UNIA chapters in Cuba, they were Jamaican immigrants.
Right.
See what they did just there? They identified people as others.
You know something?
Explain to me how a Jamaican African descendant person is different from a Cuban African descendant person in a place like the Caribbean. It's nationalism.
Could I ask you a question?
What?
Why is it when an African declares freedom and is willing to die for it, that they're also declared crazy?
Crazy or out of place?
Out of place. This is The Third Rail. Stay tuned for our next segment. I am Dr. Mark James. I'm here to speak about a book that I wrote called The Weight of My Black Skin. This book was birthed in my first trip to Uganda, when I had the opportunity to speak with university scholars in Kampala. And we started to understand that the depth of Black skin carries the weight of our past. And many times, many people that don't understand it don't get deeper than the periphery. They don't go into the depths of understanding what that weight means. This book helps you to understand a little bit deeper about the importance of understanding Black skin. Thank you. And welcome back to The Third Rail. What we want to do in this segment is we want to talk to you a little bit about what actually the third rail means. So let me give you a quick summary of what the third rail means and why we're doing what we're doing, because this is very unique in nature. The third rail is speaking about the polar differences of people. Black male, African descent, white male, European descent. I am the left rail, he is the right. The nuance of the third rail is the third rail is the truth. If you go to different places in Europe and you go to the electronic subways, the subways that are worked by electricity, one of the things that you'll find out is that the third rail is the rail that generates the energy to move the train. We believe that energy to move the train of truth is why we are here today. We are willing to talk about topics that others hide from. We are willing to come together and be vulnerable where others stay away from. We're also willing to speak about sensitive topics that we can find a way in our differences to love each other, understand each other, and dwell with each other. The third rail is symbolic about change, because the change is, if you've always did what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Ignorance only has two rails: your opinion and my opinion. And sometimes in both of those opinions, the fact or the facts hibernate. They hibernate like a bear in the middle of the winter. We choose here at the third rail to be able to identify those uncomfortable truths, exploit them, speak about them, learn from them, be vulnerable, maybe even cry from them. Because there's levels of pain that are connected to dark lives that we are all victims.
You know, I don't want to go all philosophical, but there's an inherent dualism.
Almost scared me there for a second.
There's a dualism in Western culture, a dualism in Western history, in our view of the world, in our ontology, our sense of self. And that is that there is man, and then there's nature, and they're separate, right? There's black and there's white, and there's nothing in the middle. There's true and there's false, and that's a scientific barrier right there. No conversation. There's ignorance and enlightenment. We have all these dualisms that don't resolve anything because they don't reflect the truth. Not only that, but for example, with the separation of civilization from nature, we essentially abdicate our habitat as human beings, right? And our ability to understand that we need to connect, that we need to relearn how to live with the things around us that come from nature. I say that because it's something that indigenous people tell me all the time. It's, you know, people that I meet in rural parts of the world tell me all the time, but nobody ever told me. People always told me that nature was going to the park.
You know something, Doc?
What?
This past week I was in Florida, and while I was walking, it was on a very nice college campus, and I was walking around the body of water, and there were signs that said, "Warning,
Yeah.
alligator in the pond." And I actually reflected to this podcast, and I actually thought about it, is that human beings' nature to dominate.
That's right.
Is what erases. Like the alligator needed the sign to mark the place that you decided he could or she could only be. And everybody else that's on the periphery that is not of what's being built or is not of that dominant culture must be destroyed.
That's right.
Our Native Indians with reservations.
There are a lot of metaphors there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the people that mainstream society regards as dangerous. I mean, I actually have friends who believe that African Americans being black live in the hood. You know, that's ignoring everything about the complexities of any group of people, right? But they have placed them in that pond with the alligators, and they've put up a sign, and they've said, "You move to Petersburg at your own risk." You know?
Here's the truth. Unfortunately, I've never lived in the hood. Mom worked hard. I lived in a 3-story home in Englewood, New Jersey. My mom was in real estate. She worked 3 jobs, and she retired before she was 50. You know, it is amazing to me how the isms and the schisms and these warnings keep us from the truth.
That's right.
You know, I was also thrown back because I was thinking about something. You know, I know it's a popular topic to speak about the teaching of history or different types of history in schools to our kids. It's a painful fact that nobody ever asked me, Doc, How did I feel? Nobody ever asked me, how did I feel as a young 11-year-old kid living in Englewood, New Jersey, understanding what Black American history was for the first time. And on the first page that they open up the book in February, by the way, is a picture of Black slaves chained together symmetrically on a slave ship, sitting in a room with Asians, whites, and different nationalities. You know, I already heard he who holds the hammer commands the truth.
Yeah.
And I think here on the third rail, one of the things that we want to be able to do is we want to hold the hammer. We want to have the last word and demand the truth.
We want to be Maroons.
We want to be Maroon.
Because if you think about it, people are taught in our schools today that Africans really have no interesting history or nor existence until they're thrown onto a ship as chattel slaves, you know, and taken across the ocean. That is the foundational event in modern history. And so what about the millions of other ways in which Africans have lived, experienced, and transformed the world prior to, during, and after that experience? It is a tragedy. It has to be discussed over and over again. It has to be understood. It is a Holocaust of incredible proportions. All of that is true. But a kid growing up who defines themselves, or who is forced to define themselves as coming out of that, they got a mountain to climb.
Well, our project manager just gave us a joke about when he grew up, and a kid was asked to give the class do a Black History project, and he did the project on George Washington. Again, he who knows not his history has no path, and we have to get rid of our ignorance, and we have to make sure that everybody understands their history and our combined history. Because you know what? We're inextricably tied. There's no separating the history between the Black skin and the white skin.
I'm just saying, the change requires consciousness. It requires action. It's something that you do.
Perpetual motion.
Yeah, freedom
Right?
is something that you do. It's
Right.
agency.
Right.
Because certain kind of changes that befell on people, such as slavery, when they were put in shackles, they didn't have a choice.
Right.
All right. So, you know, chains or change. To make change, you got to break the chains, and you can't just break the chains waiting for them to break themselves. You know what I'm saying?
Bob
So-
Marley said, go ahead.
No, that's all right.
You know I'm always with my roots. Bob Marley says, emancipate yourself.
From mental slavery. That's right.
Because none of them,
And free our minds.
the most dangerous chains that have ever been created are those based in fear and ignorance.
You know, I saw Bob sing that in Paris,
Did you?
and it transformed me.
So in this part of the third rail and describing it to you, again, we believe in the left side and the right side, the left rail, the right rail, and the electrifying part of what's in the middle. The middle represents the truth.